to the north of England, to my old university, Durham, to meet one of the world's leading specialists on sea level rise, Dr. Glenn Milne of the Department of Geology. Drawing on the latest data, he's able to produce computer simulations of how coastlines would have looked at different stages of the Ice Age.
Here we see the Indian continent around 21,000 years ago. And if we focus in on the northwestern part, you can see a lot of the coastline was exposed.
No, it's a huge area exposed.
A huge area exposed of the continental shelf. So we progress forward to 13.5. Now you
Big
see
change.
Yeah,
Very dramatic.
Island developing off the west coast of India.
To me, that's an extraordinary vision. It's because we know it's not there now. It's like a ghost island.
You'll notice as we progress further through time that the Gulf of Cambay gradually gets more and more flooded. 12.4, 10.6, 7.7 to 6.9. Bang.
Ah, huge change.
Quite dramatic.
Well, in that 800-year window, the Gulf of Cambay is inundated.
What interests me is that the flooded domains of India's northwest lie side by side with India's oldest and most mysterious civilization, the Indus Valley civilization, so called because its first cities were found along the Indus River. It's one of the least understood cultures from the ancient and believed to be the biggest, covering more than 1 million square miles. It flourished about the time the pyramids were built in Egypt. But I'm interested in it because even the most conservative archaeologists think its roots go back much further, to small-scale settlements dating to the end of the Ice Age, when Glenn Milne's maps show that huge floods ravaged India. Could the Indus Valley civilization be the missing link to lost cities of the underworld that I'm seeking? To find out, I'm going to Dwarika in the lonely salt marshes of the Rann of Kutch. It's one of the largest and best preserved ancient cities of the Indus Valley civilization. To explore the missing link, I'm searching for clues about its heritage and the ideas that made it tick. Archaeologist Dr. Bisht has been working on the whole Indus Valley mystery.
Can you actually say how old the site is? Are you sure of that?
It's around 3000 before Christ.
5,000 years ago.
5,000 years ago, that's correct. A small fortress was laid out here, quite a strong one. That fortress was converted to a castle.
Around that fortress, a really sophisticated city developed. They knew how to write, but unlike the Egyptian hieroglyphs, nobody's ever found a way to crack the code of their enigmatic script. They knew a lot about urban planning and the necessities of urban life, the sort of knowledge that only comes from centuries, perhaps thousands of years of accumulated experience. 5,000 years ago, they were designing a water system that was way ahead of its time, including rock-hewn reservoirs built to fight a deteriorating climate and a series of savage droughts. Civilization like this doesn't emerge overnight. As the climate changed around them, the ancient inhabitants of Dwarika made themselves masters of water and water engineering. They cut this huge cistern out of solid rock, and then they lined it with beautifully cut pieces of masonry. It's a wonderful achievement to keep and preserve the water through the dry times, to ensure the population's needs were met. The people who built this amazing city 5,000 years ago were at the end of a cycle, not the beginning. But for my investigation, the big question is, just how far back does the Indus Valley culture go? Is it possible to trace it back to its source?
Just like this.
So it would be fair to say that the glory of this site is between 3000 BC and 2000 BC. Really,
That's
What about before 3000 BC?
Before 3000 BC, what was there, we do not know. There might not be any culture, possibly, or we may find in future some earlier phases as well.
But archaeologists have already found related sites in the foothills of the Himalayas that date back much further. They're simple farming settlements, hundreds of miles from the sea, near high mountains. Places that would have made a natural refuge for the survivors of the floods that I now know took place in northwest India at exactly the same time. Is it a coincidence that the ancient Indian tradition of Manu speaks of a flood that destroyed a former civilization and of survivors who retreated to the mountains to start again? The myth of Manu is part of a vast oral tradition that includes the Vedas, India's most ancient scriptures. Most experts think the Vedas were composed around 1500 BC, too late to shed any light on the then extinct Indus Valley civilization and on our investigation. But might the experts be wrong? The Vedas are part of modern-day India, an oral tradition that's been memorized and handed down for more than 3,000 years. But if an oral tradition can survive for that long, why not for 6,000 or even 9,000 years? Could we find in the Vedas a clue to the missing link between the Indus Valley people and the end of the Ice Age? When the first Indus Valley sites were excavated in the early 20th century, the city of Daro revealed a startling new discovery.
I want you to imagine for a moment that you are back in 1500 BC and are looking out over the straight streets and brick houses of Mohenjo-Daro. Suddenly, smoke and flames begin to rise amongst them. And up one of the main streets, there streams a horde of swordsmen led by a swaying figure in an outlandish chariot. The story I'm telling you is not fantasy. It is a literal interpretation of actual discovery. This is where one of the massacres took place.
Sir Mortimer Wheeler was one of the 20th century's most influential experts on the Indus Valley civilization and helped to shape the accepted view of its origin.
34 centuries after it happened, the archaeologists of the 20th century found these bones of the massacred, mute evidence of how an age-long civilization perished within the hour.
Wheeler was one of those who believed that groups of marauding nomads invaded India from the north and west around 1500 BC. According to this Aryan invasion theory, the Vedas were the scriptures of the nomads, not of the civilized people of the ancient Indus Valley cities. But when archaeologists inspected the skeletons more closely, the invasion theory was cast into doubt. Professor B.B. Lal was a student of Wheeler's at Mohenjo-Daro, but questions the conclusions that Wheeler drew from the placing of the skeletons in different levels.
Some from the lower levels, some from the middle levels, some from the top levels, and some of them belong even to a period after the abandonment of the site. So when they don't belong to one and the same level, how can they belong to a massacre by invading Aryans?
In fact, they hadn't even died in battle. When examined, the skeletons had indeed come from different strata, meaning that they died at different times. The Aryan invasion theory should have died too. But since it was taught as established fact for most of the 20th century, it dies hard. Now, new linguistic evidence is also undermining the invasion theory. leading archaeologists think it's likely that the language in which the Vedas are expressed has been evolving in India for more than 8,000 years, and so couldn't possibly have been introduced by Aryan invaders.